Welcome to Dark Speak, where secrets never sleep, and the darkness always has something to say. True horror stories that will haunt you. We moved into my grandparents' old house at the end of that year, when they decided to leave their life in the fields and move to town. I was 9 years old, naive and unaware that what happened there would be etched in my memory like a nightmare that would never fade. The house, built in the early 90s, sat on a 5-acre plot of land on the edge of a small southern town, surrounded by dark woods. Beyond it stretched seemingly endless fields. Just south of the land, a muddy river meandered, its waters slow and thick, and on moonlit nights it revealed a murky, creepy color. On either side of the land was wilderness, except for a strange patch of land right next to it. The land was swallowed by dense bushes, covered with twisted vines, and in the middle of it was a strange house that seemed to be sinking into the ground. The house was originally a farmhouse built in the 1920s, but over the decades it had been pieced together without any planning. Rooms stuck to each other like patchwork pieces of leftover flesh, misaligned and distorted. The wooden walls on the outside were faded and rotten, always dark as if they had just been soaked with water, and no matter how hot the sun was, they never dried. The garden of the house was like a cemetery of objects. The bushes were dense, the vines were tight like a net. The fountains were broken and covered with green moss, drowning in weeds. Headless dwarf statues lay scattered, mixed with piles of rotting trash that seemed to have been there for decades. On the tree branches, old plastic bags fluttered like hanging ghosts. In the middle of the lawn, there was a rusty lawnmower lying motionless, like a corpse abandoned halfway. Every time I passed by it, I always felt suffocated, wanted to walk quickly, as if I stopped, something invisible would crawl out of the bushes to grab me. During that time, the house was inhabited by 2 old women, Mrs. Margaret and Mrs. Evelyn, and 3 young grandchildren. Margaret was quiet, sitting most of the day in a faded green rocking chair on the front porch, her dull eyes looking out into the woods. No one knew what she was seeing. Evelyn was more agile, but her steps were always limping, heavy as if each joint was gradually cracking. Both were in their 70s, but looked much older and gloomier than their years. The 3 children were my grandchildren. Jonas, the same age as me, was in the same class as me at the town school. The other 2 were 2 girls, Clara and Mira, whose faces were always pale, their eyes staring blankly at everything, sending a chill down the spine of anyone who happened to meet them. Jonas was the same age as my sister, but unlike her, he was a very unusual child. I didn't like Jonas, nor did I want anything to do with him, but we were in the same class, so we were often forced to sit in the same group or do the same homework. Jonas used that as an excuse to show up at my house at any time. He never knocked or announced anything. One time I was sitting in the game room, turned my back for less than a minute, and when I turned back, Jonas was standing there, his bright eyes glued to my screen. Another afternoon, I glanced out the window and saw Jonas playing in my pool, shooting cannonballs with a plastic tube as if it were his own place. One time he stormed into the kitchen, opened the refrigerator, and picked up a cold slice of pizza with his hands, grinning as he chewed. His every move gave me goosebumps, like a wild animal had been set free in his own territory. When we were together, I never saw Jonas truly happy. He was obsessed with Japanese manga and anime, spouting off bizarre lines in Japanese that I didn't understand. When I didn't respond, Jonas would get angry, his face contorted with frustration. More than once, he would look at me with a blank, violent gaze, as if he were imagining some bloody scenario. One time, he chased me around the backyard with a pair of sharp lawnmowers, waving them wildly, giggling as if it were some harmless joke. But in his eyes, I knew he was serious. Another time, we were standing on an old wooden bridge that crossed a creek at the end of the woods. I could have sworn Jonas had pushed me off on purpose. When I turned around, he just laughed and said it was a joke. But that crooked smile made me shiver, because I knew he wasn't lying. Unlike Jonas, the twins Clara and Mira were almost invisible. They were always quiet. Their eyes were sunken. Their clothes were wrinkled and dirty. They both stuttered, and their voices were distorted like those of toddlers, even though they were 7 years old. If someone happened to glare at them or ask them a question, they would immediately shrink away, as if haunted by some invisible punishment. They were always hungry and thirsty, and they were so thin that they were nothing but skin and bones. It was obvious that no one in the house cared about them. Their father was a regular in the prison camp, coming and going as often as he could, and hardly ever being home. That left the burden on the only woman in the family, their mother, Selina. I remember the first time I saw Selina was on a hot morning. She was huddled at the edge of the fence between our two properties, trying to connect a water pipe to our family's faucet to draw water to them. Selina was unusually tall, with a sturdy build, and her curly black hair fell unruly over her shoulders. She wore old, thick-rimmed glasses that made her face look cold and unreadable. Unlike the rest of the family, Selina's clothes were always clean, even strangely neat, as if she were deliberately trying to distance herself from the decaying surroundings. When her eyes met mine, I felt a chill run down my spine. The look was sharp, long, and heavy, as if she were searching deep into her mind, searching for something that even I couldn't understand. Selina's hair was always carefully combed, each curl shining, as if she had just stepped out of the hair salon. When she saw me, she gave me a strange smile, not just a polite smile, but as if she had been waiting for me to come. Selina asked if I could help her turn the faucet that was stuck at the edge of the fence. I walked over, tried it, and was surprised when it turned easily. She let out a soft squeal, clapping her hands together like a child with joy. Selina told me how strong and lucky I was that I had helped her. In that moment, I felt my heart lift, a strange pride, as if I had just been recognized as someone important. Selina stared at me and said mysteriously, "Did you know you have a third eye?" I froze, my eyelids fluttering. I asked again in a trembling voice, "What do you mean?" Selina just smiled, her smile growing wider, revealing her unusually white teeth. She continued, "We all have an eye, not a physical eye, but an eye of the spirit. It allows us to see the truth, no matter how terrible it is." Before I could ask any more questions, Selina turned and walked straight into the dilapidated house, her hand beckoning me to follow, and I, curious and worried, stepped in. The smell coming from inside the house made me stop. It was thick and putrid, like decay had taken shape. Spoiled food was strewn about, mold was blackening the walls. Garbage was stuffed under every chair, and there were even dirty diapers thrown in with torn plastic bags. The living room was nothing less than a nest of decay. I turned to run, but Selina grabbed my wrist like a flash, pulling me up the stairs. Her room was the complete opposite of what I had just witnessed. It was eerily clean, the pink wallpaper intact, the carpet spotless, and dozens of white porcelain dolls with wide-open eyes lined up on shelves. The furniture was old but meticulously decorated, exuding a strong scent of rose water and old perfume. It was as if I had just stepped into another world, separate from the rotting house below. Selina smiled, motioning for me to sit down on a cushioned stool in the corner of the room. She walked over to the dressing table, pulled open a drawer, and placed a black candle, a clear crystal, and a thick leather-bound book on a silver tray. As soon as I saw the 5-pointed star embossed on the cover, my stomach clenched. My head echoed with the sermons from church, where my parents had always emphasized that it was a symbol of evil. I realized it wasn't just in the book, it was everywhere, carved into the wood under the rug, scrawled on the mirror frame, even on the silver jewelry box. Panic surged through me. I jumped up, stammered an apology, said my mother was waiting for me at home. Then, without waiting for Selina to respond, I ran down the stairs and out the door, my heart pounding. Years later, I heard that Jonas's elderly Aunt Evelyn had collapsed in the living room, in front of the children, of a massive heart attack. I attended her funeral, in a dilapidated old church on the edge of town. The scene was gloomy, the walls cracked, the roof tiles jagged as if they were about to collapse. Her family sat there, their faces cold and tearless, as if death were nothing unusual. Only a strange woman, whom I had never seen before, sat in the second row, sobbing so hard that her sobs echoed through the church. No one knew who she was, and no one asked. That same year, Jonas disappeared. It was whispered that he had murdered one of his twins and had been committed to a mental institution. I never knew the full truth, but I remember my parents sitting with my sisters and me that night. They said in a stern voice, From now on, we are not allowed to go near that house again. I still remember their faces, both sad and gloomy, as if the last pieces of truth had been put together in their hearts. And it was then that I understood all the little things that I had been ignoring for so long. The strange looks, the forced smiles, the meaningless gestures, all were not harmless. Behind them was something darker, deeper, and more terrifying than any nightmare I had ever experienced. Then came the time for the remaining members of that family to leave. All disappeared, leaving only Margaret, an old, worn-out body, living a lingering life in a house that was about to collapse. Not long after, people found her collapsed and dead alone in the dark living room. Her death was quiet. No one was by her side, as if the house had swallowed the last of her soul. Her estate was quickly auctioned off. A few months later, one of my former elementary school teachers, Mrs. Robinson, bought it with her husband. They tore down almost the entire decaying structure, leaving only the original 1920s frame, along with a small section upstairs that had been Selina's bedroom. That day, Mrs. Robinson invited us to see the renovations. The house was so different that I could hardly believe it had been the haunting place of my childhood. The space was open and airy. The floors were new, the smell of paint still strong, the white light reflected off the bright walls. Everything was perfect, except when she led us upstairs. As soon as I stepped into the familiar room, every hair on my body stood up. This was where Selina had lived, where I had seen the strange symbols carved into the wood. Even though the floor was now covered with new carpet, I knew clearly that the pentagram was still lying underneath, silently waiting. I stood there, feeling something watching me from the wall, a cold, piercing gaze that made my stomach churn as if I were about to throw up. I made an excuse, saying I had a headache and had to leave early. Mrs. Robinson was briefly disappointed that I had promised to stay for dinner, but I didn't dare turn around. From that day on, I avoided that house at all costs. However, fate brought me back. Last year, Mrs. Robinson called me, asking me to watch her 2 dogs while she and her husband went on a business trip for a week. I reluctantly accepted, telling myself it was just a normal, easy, well-paying job. The first 4 nights passed incredibly smoothly. Each night, I unlocked the smart lock and the 2 dogs, a Shih Tzu named Poppy and a pug named Otis, came out to greet me, wagging their tails happily. I fed them, played with them for a few minutes, turned on the porch light, and locked the door. The house was so quiet that I believed that everything in my memories was just a childhood illusion. But on the last night, everything changed. As I was about to leave, Otis suddenly rushed toward the stairs, barking fiercely, his small body tensing as if he wanted to rush up. Poppy cowered, whined, retreated, her eyes never leaving the dim darkness upstairs. I looked after him, seeing only the silent void. Then suddenly, a sound, a heavy thud, as if something large had fallen to the floor. My heart was pounding, but I tried to calm myself, until the second sound, louder, echoed throughout the house. I didn't hesitate a second longer. I quickly hugged Otis, shouted for Poppy to follow, then ran to the door, slammed it shut, and locked it. All the way back, it felt like something was following me, a long darkness, silently watching my every step. It was now a year. It had been more than 4 years since the family had disappeared from town, and no one had heard from them. But then the rumors started again. An old friend told me she had seen Selina at a farmer's market in another town. Selina was no longer the same. She claimed to be the bearer of truth, the seer of truth. They said she had founded a small community, living in rows of trailers deep in the woods, where the light had little reach. Weird flyers began appearing on public bulletin boards, with strange symbols and vague messages about enlightenment. There were even anonymous phone calls to people's homes, asking about faith and enlightenment. I didn't believe it. Selina had never been a savior to me. She was the embodiment of darkness, a woman who had left her children to starve, left her own mother to die in a rotting house. And more importantly, I believed that she had brought something with her, inviting it to come. That something had never left. It remained, lurking in the walls, on the floor, in the dark corners of the pink room. Sometimes I still had dreams. In my dreams, Selena stood beside Jonas. They both looked at me, their eyes glinting with a sickly light, their smiles wide as if waiting for the moment when I too would cross the line they had chosen long ago. They stood at the foot of my bed, staring at me, not saying a word. That feeling still haunts me to this day. Every time I pass that house, I shiver as if someone is watching from behind the walls. Despite the shiny new paint and the clean furniture, it's all just a shell. Inside, the place is alive, still remembering. And I'm sure it has never forgotten what happened. My name is Dorian. I live in a small lakeside town in the north. My high school years were pretty uneventful, at least until strange things started to happen. I got to know a lot of new people, and I also found a few close friends. One of them was Isaac. Isaac was a grade younger than me, still in middle school. We hung out on the weekends, mostly at the community center, where the boys used to hang out at the basketball court. Isaac was crazy about basketball. My dad and I even took him into town to watch a Pistons game. It was the first time Isaac had seen a real stadium, and he was as excited as a kid seeing fireworks for the first time. But then things changed. As I got older, busy with school, driving practice, and a part-time job, I didn't spend as much time with Isaac as before. He started to have a different attitude. Whenever I said I was busy, Isaac would immediately get angry, even strangely silent. I used to think it was just childish, but gradually it turned into something more frightening. One time I was cleaning the house and didn't pay attention to my phone. When I finished, I realized that Isaac had deleted me from his Snapchat friends list. I quickly texted him to ask, and he replied that I had made up an excuse to avoid meeting him. Isaac's messages lingered in my mind for days. I started to feel controlled. A few weeks later, when it was just dark, Isaac suddenly appeared in front of my apartment. No warning, no message. I opened the door and asked him why he didn't call, but he didn't answer. He just stood there, staring at me with his dark eyes, silent for a few seconds, then turned and walked away. That moment made me cold. Why did he come at that hour? Why didn't he say a word? From that day on, I decided to turn off my location on Snapchat, so Isaac couldn't track me anymore. But then he added me back, and everything was the same. Whenever I didn't come to visit, he would get angry or fall into a state of extreme sadness. Then one day, I received a text from Marcus, an old friend of mine, whom I rarely saw in real life. He knew Isaac and his ex-girlfriend quite well. Marcus told me some horrible things. That Isaac had once held a knife to his ex-girlfriend's throat, then forced himself on her in the worst way. I was stunned. My heart clenched when I heard that. I didn't want to believe it, but what I had witnessed from Isaac made it impossible for me to deny the truth. At that moment, I knew I had been hanging out with a psychopath, and what was even scarier was that he hadn't let me go. I unfriended him on every platform without hesitation. Before I could block him completely, he messaged me on Instagram, asking me why I cut him off. My phone rang repeatedly, filled with persistent messages. I only replied briefly that I needed time to myself and would contact him when I felt better, but that was just an excuse. I wanted to stay away from him forever. That night, I was home alone. My parents had gone to the next town to have dinner with some old friends, and the apartment was filled with heavy silence. As I sat in the living room, there was a knock on the door. The knock was so loud and decisive that my heart stopped. I walked over to look through the peephole. No one was there. I hesitated for a few seconds, then opened the door slightly to observe the hallway. No one, no sound. I thought maybe someone rang the bell and ran away. So I closed the door, trying to reassure myself that it was just a prank play by the kids in the neighborhood. But when I returned to my room, just as I was pulling the curtains, I suddenly realized that the darkness outside had suddenly become much darker. The streetlights had just gone out, and at that moment, I saw a faint light flashing in the corner of my eye. At first, I thought it was a light from inside someone's car, but the feeling in my stomach dropped when I saw it clearly. A tall figure standing motionless right in front of a car window. It was him, Isaac. I immediately opened the window and shouted, my voice trembling, "Tell him to go away, that I didn't want to see him here anymore." He raised his head, his eyes empty, and told me in a monotone voice to let him in, that he had something to say. I firmly refused, forcing him to leave, but then he started to move towards me, slowly and coldly. The dim light caught his hand, and I realized that he was holding something. When he raised it high, my whole body went cold. A long, shiny knife reflected the weak light. I stepped back, my heart pounding, screaming that I was going to call the police. He stood still for a few seconds, his eyes unblinking, then abruptly turned and walked away. Only the sound of his footsteps rustled in the darkness, disappearing as quickly as he had appeared. I trembled and called the police. When they arrived, I recounted every detail, describing him as clearly as I could, but it all seemed to be in vain. He disappeared into the darkness, leaving me with a suffocating obsession. I have not heard from him since that day. Honestly, I would not be surprised if he had planned to kill me that night. I was sure that in his eyes, human life was just a game, and perhaps only a re-education camp or some other place of detention could have stopped him. Not only was I horrified by the experience, but it was probably one of the most traumatic moments of my life. The fact that my parents agreed to him made me feel even more uneasy, as if they didn't understand how dangerous he really was. I was glad I had cut off all contact with him from the start, because if I had hung around, I might become an endless punching bag for his rage, or worse, dead. It all happened at the end of a cold year, when I went on what I thought would be a fun and simple first date. It was a girl named Mariah, whom I met on a dating app. We texted back and forth for about 2 weeks, and since we both love horror movies, we agreed to choose a new movie as our first date. It was a late showing after 10 at night at a small, run-down movie theater in the suburbs. I drove to pick her up around 9:30. Mariah seemed normal, friendly enough but a little shy. She was quieter than I expected during the drive, but when I started talking about horror movies from my childhood, she opened up and started talking more. When we got there, the parking lot was eerily empty. I joked that it looked like the set of a horror movie. The neon lights were dim, flickering on and off, and the lobby was completely empty except for the popcorn counter staff. When I asked him if it would be crowded tonight, he just laughed and said we were the only ones who had bought tickets for that show. At first, I thought it was great. No loud crowds, just me, her, and the movie. We went into theater number 6 and chose seats in the middle row, just far enough from the screen. It was unusually cold in the theater, so much so that Mariah shivered and folded her arms. I handed her my hoodie, and we both laughed, feeling like the perfect date joke. We sat and chatted a little while longer while waiting for the main movie. Just as the lights dimmed and the final credits were about to end, I suddenly noticed movement in the corner of my eye. A stranger walked into the theater. What gave me goosebumps was the way he moved. He didn't look around, didn't check the seats, didn't rush like a latecomer. He just silently walked slowly up the stairs and chose to sit right behind us. Out of hundreds of empty seats, he chose that seat. Mariah turned her head, glanced at me, her eyes both annoyed and bewildered, as if to say, "Really?" I just smiled awkwardly, but immediately a chill ran down my spine. Do you know that feeling when someone's eyes are glued to the back of your neck? Yes, I could feel every single glance piercing me. A moment later, I glanced back. In that brief moment, I realized he wasn't looking at the screen. He was staring at us. And the creepiest thing was that he didn't flinch or pretend to look away. He just sat there, motionless, with eyes that seemed to tear my soul apart. He just sat there leaning forward, like someone staring at a dramatic scene. But what sent a chill down my spine was that his face wasn't facing the screen. It was facing us, directly at me. I lowered my head and whispered to Mariah, "He's just staring." She nodded slowly, her lips trembling slightly. "I know." We tried to ignore it. The movie started, eerie music and sounds filling the empty room. I tried to concentrate, but every few minutes, the presence behind me would take my breath away. It wasn't just a normal disturbance. There was something intense, persistent, like he was waiting for a certain moment. About 20 minutes later, I leaned forward, turned my head to glance back, hoping for a casual glimpse. But still, he was still staring. The man was probably in his 40s, clean-shaven, pale-faced, wearing a dark gray hoodie. What made me choke were his eyes. They were empty, lifeless, but not dull. On the contrary, they were wide open, motionless, as if he hadn't even blinked once. I turned back and whispered to Mariah, "This guy scares me." She was really pale now. "Should we switch seats?" she asked. We hesitated, then backed down. Wherever we moved, it was the same cold room. Wherever we sat, it was still his view, and if we stood up and changed seats, it would be tantamount to provocation. A few minutes later, what I feared most happened. A slow, deep intake of breath, right behind me. Not loud, not dramatic, but he was clearly inhaling my breath. I spun around. He was leaning forward, his face inches from my seat. I growled, "Hey, can you stop?" No response. Just him slowly leaning back, as if he had never done anything. I took Mariah's hand. "Let's go." We stood up and walked silently down the front row. The angle of the screen was terrible, but at least we kept our distance. Still, I had no mind to watch the movie. Every few minutes, I turned back, and every time he was still there, motionless, his dull eyes never leaving us. Halfway through the movie, we heard footsteps echoing in the empty room. He was coming down the stairs. Mariah squeezed my hand, both of us holding our breath. The footsteps stopped just a few rows ahead. We didn't turn back, didn't dare. I felt him standing there, silent, for who knows how long. Then, as if ordered, he turned back around, back to his original position. I whispered, "We have to go." Mariah nodded, her eyes brimming with tears. We hurriedly gathered our things, tried to walk as quietly as possible, and left the theater. Down the dark hallway, I glanced quickly through the glass door. He was standing right in the middle of the aisle, not watching the movie, just standing there and staring after us. We went straight to the popcorn counter, telling the clerk that there was a guy acting strangely in room 6. His face immediately stiffened, his smile fading. He asked quietly, "Again? You mean again?" I was surprised. "What do you mean?" He was confused and sighed. "It's been about a month now. He keeps showing up randomly, always late, never buying tickets or stuff. You guys aren't the first to complain." I was annoyed. "So why hasn't anyone kicked him out yet?" The clerk swallowed, eyes worried, voice trembling. "Technically, he didn't do anything illegal." The theater management just shook their heads, their voices indifferent and terrifying. Unless he directly touched someone or violated the rules, there was nothing we could do. Mariah was almost in tears now. She asked shakily if anyone could escort us to the car. The clerk nodded, calling one of the guards to join us. We walked quickly outside, hoping to escape that terrifying shadow. He didn't follow that night. At least, not directly. But as I drove, I couldn't help but feel a chill. The most haunting thought crept into my head. What if he had taken down my license plate? What if he had followed behind, keeping a safe distance, and found out where Mariah lived when I dropped her off? For weeks after that, the unease haunted me. Every night, I wake up to the slightest noise outside my window. I talk to a friend who is a police officer. He frowns and says it's absurd that the theater can't kick him out. The entertainment industry has the right to refuse service to anyone it deems dangerous, he insists. But then he sighs. Apparently that's not so easy in practice. I tried to avoid that area, never daring to go there again. Mariah and I still texted back and forth a few times, but we both avoided seeing each other again. I think partly because of the shock, partly because neither of us wanted to recall that nightmare again. To this day, I have never been back to that cinema. Not once. Strangely, I searched all the online review sites, and there was no mention of that man. Not a single comment, not a single complaint. It was as if he just appeared in front of us. What made me shiver even more was a question that was never answered. How many people have actually experienced something similar, but chose to stay silent, never to tell about it? A seemingly normal day at the cinema turned into a nightmare when the main character and Mariah were followed by a strange man. He didn't watch the movie, just sat right behind them, staring without blinking, and then quietly move around the theater as if he was trying to instill fear. Although the theater staff reported it, the management was helpless because he hadn't done anything illegal. Although they were escorted to the car safely, both were still heavily haunted. The main character always had in mind the fear that he had memorized a license plate number and could find Mariah's house. After that night, they didn't see each other anymore, only texting a few times and then going silent. The fear made the narrator never dare to return to that theater again. Strangely, no one else left any reviews or complaints about that man. It was as if he only existed during that fateful night the two experienced. To this day, the main character still doesn't know if that person was a sickly, obsessive person or something that didn't belong to this world. Only one thing is certain. That memory will forever be a haunting wound, like a shadow that never disappears in the mind. The story ends here. Thank you and see you in the next videos. Goodbye.